What's going on, everyone? It's JJ Zachariason. I am the editor-in-chief over at FanDuel and at numberFire.com. Here to do a little fantasy football Q&A. I will be going until 3:25 p.m. today, Eastern. And then my colleague Jim Sonis is going to hop on and talk a little MLB DFS for those of you who play MLB DFS, which you should be playing because there's not a lot going on in terms of doing other things out in the world right now. But I have some questions already over on YouTube. If you guys want to ask questions, that's where you should be asking them. You know, historically, I've done these over on Facebook Live. I am streaming on Facebook Live, but I'm mostly taking questions from YouTube. So definitely check that out. Make sure you subscribe to the FanDuel YouTube channel. Let's get going. We got the first question says, gross to talk about, but what do you think about the Chargers defense week 1 against Joe Burrow, who will be taking his first ever snaps against NFL competition without the benefit of preseason games? Yeah, I think that's a great call. I would be looking at a guy or a defense like the Chargers in week 1. There's a lot of other options that you could go for and teams that you could draft late. But yeah, I mean, I like the Bengals overall in terms of their stacking ability and the potential of that offense this year with Burrow. But I do like the Chargers defense in week 1 as favorites, even though they're not huge favorites. But you know that mistakes are likely to be made, even though Joe Burrow is a strong prospect. I got one from Jeff Hicks who says, long time, first time on YouTube. Is there ever a time to believe positive coach speak as opposed to negative? Thanks for taking my call. Yeah, I mean, look at the situation that we're in right now where there's no preseason games, which means you're really having to buy into what the coach speak says and what the coaching narratives are saying more so than you have historically. So if you look at a situation like Tampa Bay right now, Ronald Jones, Bruce Arians comes out and gives him a lot of love. Bruce Arians in the past has done the same with guys like Andre Ellington, for instance. So there's some fear there, but at least you're getting some sort of confidence, and that's really all we can really work off of right now. But I think this year more than other years, you're really going off of your priors. You're going off of how you feel about these players before you hear these coaches speak. But I think that there is something that you can take away from these press conferences and so on, like the Rams talking about having there being a split backfield. I mean, obviously still value Cam Akers as the best back in that backfield, but understand that it might be a little bit slow for him to then take over that backfield. So I'm still looking into positive coach speak. I do think negative coach speak is more important though, because anytime a coach is saying something negative about a player on his team, that's not a good thing. So definitely pay more attention to that still. Tips on how to choose tight end this year in the late rounds. Yeah, great question. So I think this year, like most years, it's either get one early, get a Kittle or Kelsey, or get one late. I did do a study this offseason on spotting breakout tight ends. And really, what I found within that study is that breakout tight ends are typically, they don't come from nowhere. So they had decent draft capital. And they had some sort of target share the previous season. They're also year 2 or year 3 guys. They have good quarterbacks and they're athletic. The athleticism piece is very, very important. The average breakout running back in this sample that I was working with had a speed score, which is a weight adjusted 40 time that ranked in the 86th percentile. And that was the average among this breakout tight end group that I was working with. So if you take that and you look at some of the late round tight ends this year, all the criteria that I was talking about, TJ Hawkinson is one that really pops and he really fits all 4 of the criteria pieces. So I like TJ Hawkinson, and someone who I like really late. I like Irv Smith, another guy who fits the mold pretty well. So target those younger players who haven't had an opportunity really to break out. We know that tight end is a position that takes a little bit of time to get used to in the NFL. So I wouldn't put that much stock into how TJ Hawkinson performed last year. We at least saw a ceiling last season, especially early in the season against Arizona. So I like Hawk. I like Irv Smith. I think there's a lot of guys that you can target. Like Blake Jarwin's fine. Jonnu Smith is fine enough. Even Chris Herndon's fine. Ian Thomas. I mean, there's enough late round guys that, you shouldn't feel the need to get, especially those middle round ones. The middle tier, the middle round tight ends historically have just busted at a really high rate. So I'm really avoiding guys like Darren Waller, Tyler Higbee. They're just not players that are finding my rosters very often. Last pick in a best ball draft, have both Allen Robinson and Anthony Miller. Considering Trubisky for the stack, feels gross but surely contrarian and might pay off. Thoughts? Yeah, I mean, it's definitely contrarian. I would be shocked if Nick Foles just plays all 16 games this year. So there's something to that. And the other thing with Mitch Trubisky is we've seen him have a decent fantasy ceiling in the past. So I think it's contrarian enough that if it's a late round pick, it's not that big of a deal to begin with. So sure, go for it. Let's see. How do you feel about Ronald Jones this season? And do you think Keyshawn Vaughn will replace him at some point? Great question by Danny here. I talked about the Bruce Arians coach speak a little bit earlier. I'm not super high on Ronald Jones as a player. I generally target running backs who catch passes out of the backfield, and he's not only not done that in the NFL, he didn't do that in college very well. He had one of the lowest final season reception shares coming out in his draft class. And then on top of that, last season, his highest snap share in a single game was only 53%. He wasn't used very often, in the context of his team, the fact that he was competing with just Peyton Barber and Dare Agumbawale. And now you get LaShawn McCoy there, and then Keyshawn Vaughn, who you mentioned in this question. I liked Keyshawn Vaughn a lot as a prospect. He's a do-it-all guy, jack of all trades, master of none, but he's solid. He's a very solid back. And what this comes down to is whether or not, who Tom Brady wants in that backfield to pass protect and catch passes. That's the guy that I want on my fantasy roster. I'm not feeling Ronald Jones as that guy, given he ranked really low in Pro Football Focus's pass blocking rankings last year. Hasn't been much of a pass catcher. I think he gets a lot of early down work, and he's fine as an early down runner. I just want more upside. So, Keyshawn Vaughn's ADP has dropped a lot over the last month or two, especially because he was on the COVID list. So Vaughn, you should be able to get really, really cheap. I think he's the guy that I like most out of that backfield. I still think you can throw darts at LaShawn McCoy because he looks like he could be the pass catching back on that team to start the season. I think of those guys, I think you can draft all of them, but of those guys, I'm leaning more towards the cheaper end and just hoping that one of them hits. Who do you like for the shorter term and longer term production in a rookie draft among McFarland, Dallas, Pirine, and Benjamin? McFarland is your only ranked rookie running back. Yeah, I ranked my top 36, and McFarland was the only guy in there. So obviously he's the top of my list there because James Conner is going to be a free agent next year. DJ Dallas, I'm not sure is going to really see that much work. Pirine is a little bit interesting with Le'Veon Bell in front of him. And Benjamin I liked a lot as a pass catcher, and he should work within that Arizona offense. But of those players, McFarland is the most intriguing because I do think that he sees some work this year as a clear change of pace. He's easily the fastest running back in that Pittsburgh backfield. He has at least a little bit of upside because of that. And there is some narrative there with McFarland having played with Mike Tomlin's kid in Maryland. So I don't mind McFarland. I don't love any of these guys, at least in redraft. In Dynasty, McFarland's the guy that I have the most of those four. Is Nick Chubb's inefficiency at the goal line / in the red zone a result of offensive line play calling, or does he just stink with not much room to run? I think it's a combination of play calling and variance. I'm not putting a ton of stock in what that Browns coaching staff did last year. They were bad. They didn't have a lot of play action passing. We're going to see a complete 180 this season with this Stefanski offense, and that's really going to help Baker Mayfield in this offense just be a lot more efficient. And so I think that there's going to be some positive regression for Nick Chubb. He scored fewer touchdowns than he should have last year. The offense should be more efficient. I expect him to score more. The problem is I don't know how much Kareem Hunt is going to dig into his workload. Nick Chubb led the NFL in percentage of team rushes last year, and he had the third most percentage of team rushes that we've seen since 2011. So it's not like Nick Chubb has a lot of room for growth there. If anything, he's only going to lose some of that work. And we saw him lose some of that work when Kareem Hunt came back. So I'm fine with where Nick Chubb is being drafted. I get it, but I'm a little bit worried about his pass catching ceiling and then what his rushing share is going to truly look like with Kareem Hunt playing all season. Let's see. JJ, how do the Penguins being eliminated affect fantasy football? It makes me a lot sadder, that's for sure. JJ, you sound so much different, not on 1.5 times speed. Well, if you're listening to Late Round Podcast on 1.5 times speed, that must take you like 6 minutes to finish an episode. Hey, JJ, thanks for tuning in. Who would you keep, Davante Adams or Woods and Carson? So it sounds like you can either keep Davante Adams or Robert Woods and Chris Carson. I would be keeping Davante Adams of those three. It's tough though. I did an episode. I have a podcast for those of you who don't know called the Late Round Podcast. It's a quick bite-sized, 15 to 20 minute show. And I try to dig into more of the process oriented stuff with fantasy sports and the game theory stuff, as opposed to just player analysis. And I did an episode on keeper league selection, and that episode should help you answer a question like this better than I can on the show, because there's a lot of information that I would need in order to make a good logical decision for you. But of those three, Davante Adams would be the guy. Second pick in a 10-team PPR. Do you take Saquon, Zeke, or pivot to someone else? And ideally, who would be your 1, 2, 3 to start a draft from that position? I would go Saquon there, and then I'd see if a running back falls. One of those guys in that, since it's a 10-team league, one of them probably will. So like a Josh Jacobs is totally fine in round 2. And then in round 3, I'd try to look at a wide receiver. Maybe I can get a Kenny Golladay or Mike Evans there. And I'd feel really solid about that start with 2 running backs and a really solid stud alpha wide receiver. 10-team league, 0.2 points for rush attempt, 0.2 points for catches. I'm picking number 1. Sounds like it's a running back heavy league. Coming back for pick 20 and 21, do you advise 2 running backs, 1 running back, and Kelsey or Kittle, or even Lamar and a running back or a running back and wide receiver? All right, so don't get Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson's in a void at his ADP. It is a 10-team league, so in shallower leagues, 8, 10-team team leagues, you can get away with going early round tight end a little bit more because you need your roster in these smaller leagues to be really good. You have to. You're not playing against 13 other teams where everyone's roster kind of has some sort of hole. In a 10-team league, a lot of rosters are pretty strong. So I understand going for a tight end more in shallower leagues actually than the deeper ones. But given these scoring settings, I would most definitely be looking to go running back here if you're getting 0.2 points for rush and 0.2 for a catch. The rushes obviously outweigh the catches there just in general for the running back position. Then if you can get a stud, that's even better. So I'd be going running back. I would not be going Lamar Jackson, though. I'm not drafting a quarterback early. It seems really difficult to figure out the target share for 2 teams in particular this season, the Colts and the Giants. Is there one particular pass catcher on either team you really like? Obviously I like T.Y. Hilton because he's probably the one guy on those teams that's locked in for a decent target share, but I'm assuming you're talking about sort of the secondary pieces. So Paris Campbell, Michael Pittman Jr., and then on the Giants, you have basically every wide receiver. I'm low-key interested in Sterling Shepard still. He has a great floor when he's active. He's basically giving you high-end wide receiver 3, low-end wide receiver 2 numbers. I want more of a ceiling with my wide receivers, of course, but I think Sterling Shepard's a pretty safe bet where he's being drafted right now. And then on the Colts, I think Michael Pittman profiles to have a higher ceiling than Paris Campbell does. But Paris Campbell, just given the season that we're walking into with the lack of prep, lack of preseason, it's a little bit safer to go with the second-year guy in Paris Campbell, even though he didn't get a lot of looks last year and a lot of work last year. A little bit safer, I think, to go with Paris Campbell over Pittman. But, man, Pittman is the traditional X. He's the traditional alpha potential wide receiver. So I see the ceiling being a little bit better with Pittman. And in the late rounds, that's really what you're chasing. But I just think a lot of these rookie wide receivers might not come to fruition and have a great season until later in the year once they get a little used to what's going on. Let's see. If Amari Cooper is your wide receiver 1 after the first few rounds, what type of receivers would you be targeting for the rest of the draft? I wouldn't look too much into this. I know that you're thinking sort of more of a ceiling floor kind of combo. I'm not super into Amari Cooper at his ADP just because I think that Michael Gallup and even CeeDee Lamb could end up being better values overall. And I like, someone like Adam Thielen more than Amari Cooper in that range, but I wouldn't look into this too much. I think that if you're going Amari Cooper, he's your wide receiver 1. You can get a Robert Woods if you want in the next round, someone who has a high floor, or you could get, I like someone like Tyler Lockett too, who has both the floor and the ceiling technically. But if you want to go with a guy like Robert Woods for the floor, DK Metcalf for more of the ceiling, I don't think it's that big of a deal if Amari Cooper is your wide receiver 1. I know he's been inconsistent, but the wide receiver position is inherently inconsistent. Starters and starters are studs. Need to bolster my flexes. It's a 3-flex standard league. Who are your mid-round to later round guys I should target to trade for and people might be down on but could be great? That's a good question. Off the top of my head, it's a standard league, so I'd be looking at running backs. I mentioned Cam Akers earlier on the stream and how the Rams are likely going to split that backfield. I like Darrell Henderson. Darrell Henderson, I've done a study that shows essentially that rookie running backs and wide receivers who didn't do anything their rookie season generally don't become studs in fantasy football. It's just how it is, especially the running back position. Usually we have an idea of who the stud running backs are going to be based on how they perform their rookie season. And Darrell Henderson did not perform during his rookie season, but his cost is so low at this point that it's really not that hard to acquire him and just shoot for upside. Darrell Henderson, I have a prospect model that one of the metrics that goes into that prospect model is yards per team play at the running back position. It's a pretty predictive metric for how guys translate from the college to pros. Over the last two draft classes, only Jonathan Taylor has a higher yards per team play mark than Darrell Henderson does. He was a great prospect, a really efficient prospect, So I'm kind of intrigued by him later in drafts. I think in a standard league where, in your flex spots, you might lean running back a little bit more than what you would in a PPR format in the flex. Darrell Henderson's kind of an interesting guy to target. Dynasty outlook on AJ Green and Mark Ingram. I mean, I sell guys who are getting that old. I mean, that's the basis of my philosophy there. AJ Green and Mark Ingram might both have RB2 and wide receiver 2 type seasons this year. That's fine. But if you can get something out of them, I would do it. But I would also say that you're probably going to extract the most value from those older guys when the season gets rolling. And, there's a lot of concern about AJ Green's health. So you're going to be selling him a little bit low. But if he starts to produce, and then obviously some teams end up not performing very well in your dynasty league, but there are contenders, I would sell the guys like Green and Ingram to contenders once they do perform, especially early in the season. And that's especially true with Mark Ingram, because I could see a scenario where Mark Ingram starts off pretty hot and he's fine, and he's getting a lot of work in that Ravens backfield. And then later in the season, we see more and more J.K. Dobbins, and then that's going to hurt Mark Ingram. But if you can sell him before that point, then you're going to extract the most value. Next question I see on here is, if Sony Michel isn't healthy to start the season, do you think Damian Harris gets a shot at the starting job, or does Lamar Miller scare you off? Look, guys, if Lamar Miller is scaring you off, then Damian Harris, or even Sony Michel. I mean, I'm not drafting Sony Michel, but if Lamar Miller is turning you off from Damian Harris has bigger problems than you just being scared off by that. Lamar Miller coming off that injury, he's a veteran now. He's not going to have the same burst that he once had. Damian Harris wasn't a bad prospect, but again, just to go back to what I said about Darrell Henderson, you shouldn't be heavily targeting guys who didn't do much during their rookie season. But in this case, Damian Harris is so cheap, right? Why not go for a guy like Harris? So I would still think that Damian Harris gets the starting gig if Sony Michel is indeed out. James White seeing a lot of looks through the air. But think of it this way, too. Sony Michel sees 240 plus attempts last year and still isn't very relevant in fantasy football. I think Damian Harris would steal that role, and that's not really that enticing. So, that's the main reason why I'm just avoiding all running backs in New England outside of James White. Let's see. This next one is a 12-team PPR Superflex 3 wide receiver auction league. Can keep Godwin and Golladay for 28% budget. Suggest or let them walk. Look, it's really hard to answer a question like this one, not knowing the specifics for your league, but the two of them for 28% makes sense, especially in a 3 wide receiver type format. So I think it's fine. Yeah, I would do that. Next one. Hi, JJ. Big fan of both Hayden Hurst and Calvin Ridley, and I think both are good values. I do too. Thoughts on targeting both of these guys on the same fantasy team, or should I diversify? I think it's totally fine. I mean, look, there's been studies about stacking, one of them done by Establish the Runs Mike Leone, a friend of mine, and he did a study on stacking, which basically tells you that, yes, stacking can work, but you can also think of it this way. If you're stacking a team and that team ends up exceeding expectation, you're gaining a ton of value out of those picks no matter what. So even if you're worried about the diversification, at least in this case, you're talking about the Atlanta offense. That was the number 1 passing offense in the league in terms of attempts last year. In their 4 seasons with Dirk Cutter as offensive coordinator, they've ranked in the top 8 in pass attempts. They're going to throw the ball a lot, and these are the top 2 options outside of Julio Jones in that offense. I think it's fine targeting both of those guys. I like Hayden Hurst a lot late. I like Calvin Ridley. I think that he could be this year's Chris Godwin. So yeah, I'm all about that. I think I would be cool with having both of them on my team. Next one, which Raider rookie wide receiver do you prefer at their ADP? I like them both at their ADP. I think Ruggs is safer because he's going to have a starting role right away, more than likely. But Bryan Edwards was someone, my prospect model loved him. I love him as a player after watching him. He had a really early breakout age, which is a great indicator of NFL success. And really, you look at his, not last season, but the one before that, he was competing with Deebo Samuel in that South Carolina offense, and he was putting up pretty comparable numbers. I know Deebo was banged up a little bit, but Bryan Edwards could be a very, very good wide receiver. If he's not on any of your radars, he should be on your radars. I still have Henry Ruggs ahead of him, but I do think that both of them are viable and draftable, especially in deeper formats. I'm convinced AJ Green won't last the season. Yeah, that makes you and a million other people. Who benefits more if I'm right, Higgins or Ross? I've been snagging both very late in drafts. Thanks. I mean, look, we've kind of seen what John Ross is, right? I mean, he's had spiked weeks. I didn't mind him as a prospect. He had great college production. Obviously, he's a speedy guy. He can stretch the field. We'll see high average depth of targets. But I like T. Higgins a lot, too. T. Higgins profiles more as what A.J. Green has been. T. Higgins really can be an AJ Green. So I would be more intrigued by Higgins than Ross in this case, but I think Ross is the safer bet of the two. Is Melvin Gordon being underrated? He's top 20 perennially and is now running behind the best offensive line he's ever had. He catches passes well too. I have difficulty imagining he won't outperform his current ADP. I mean, look, my issue with Melvin Gordon right now is that he's in a backfield with Phillip Lindsay. And Phillip Lindsay's a great early down runner. Obviously Melvin Gordon was splitting a backfield with Austin Eckler last year, but Austin Eckler wasn't carving out a massive rushing share like Phillip Lindsay has the opportunity to. And Eckler was obviously stealing some more work through the air than what we would see from a Phillip Lindsay. So I like Melvin Gordon in terms of being a pass catcher and the primary pass catcher in that offense. But I do think that there's a non-zero chance that we see a closer split in rush share between Melvin Gordon and Phillip Lindsay than we're projecting. So I basically think Melvin Gordon is being drafted exactly where he should be being drafted. Advice for picking at 9 in a PPR snake draft: take the first quarterback. No, I would not be taking a quarterback that early. I think it's fine if you want to go wide receiver, but I would probably look also at going like a Miles Sanders if he falls for sure. I like Miles Sanders. I like Joe Mixon. I like Kenyon Drake. I would probably be leaning running back in that scenario. Should T.Y. Hilton be targeted as a wide receiver too, considering his past injury issues? I have no problem with it. Obviously, Phillip Rivers is there now. There should be a little bit more stability than what he had last year at the quarterback position. I like Hilton. I think he's properly valued. The wide receiver position in general, ADP-wise, is pretty efficient this year. I don't have many obvious qualms at the position. I did an article on players to avoid, and wide receiver was easily the hardest to pinpoint which wide receivers I truly want to avoid this year, because I don't know if there are any. Next question: who is your favorite last round running back flyer? I'm going to go with DeAndre Washington. You're associating him with the best offense in football. And you have a rookie running back starting in front of him. We don't know exactly how that's going to transition and how Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to look, even though I do have Clyde Edwards-Helaire as a firm first round pick. DeAndre Washington last year played 3 games with 60% or more of Oakland's running back rushes. He ranked as the RB 9, 11, and 9 in those games. So he's proven to be effective. He's a good pass catcher. I think he fits in that offense. I wouldn't be surprised if DeAndre Washington sees more work than you would expect to start the season, and then CEH slowly works into that every down role. Why are you so down on Gurley? He will smash his ADP with zero competition, and they will work him into the ground on a 1-year deal. He was walking with a limp prior, but was running fine. Look, I'm low on Gurley because I wasn't that impressed by Gurley last year per se. A lot of that had to do with the offensive line, but I'm not convinced that the Atlanta offensive line is dramatically better. There's a reason that the Rams 2 years, the 2 years prior to last year with Sean McVay were a lot better offensively than what we saw this past year, is because the offensive line was a lot better. And we didn't see that last year. I'm not convinced that Atlanta and a pass-heavy offensive scheme is going to give Todd Gurley the number of touches that we want to see at the goal line. And you saying that I'm down on Gurley, I don't think I'm that down on Gurley. I think I have him as like an early fourth round pick or so, which is around-ish ADP. So I'm not super down on Gurley, but I would rather have Chris Carson and James Conner over Todd Gurley because I see more 3-down potential. And I don't see that wear and tear on those guys, even though James Conner, even though they're both injury risks in their own manner, I don't see the wear and tear on them like we do with Todd Gurley. And then he also says, can we see a live pause like your podcast? Yeah. Thanks for tuning in. I don't know if there's any more questions over on YouTube. We'll see if there's anything else anywhere else. Will Dissly, someone asked about. I'm not really that high on Will Dissly just because he's coming off that injury. We don't know how frequently he'll be used and how quickly he'll be used. And there's a lot of competition at the tight end position in general. Like I said earlier, I like a guy like Irv Smith a lot, and you can get him for basically free. So I would be leaning that way. I'm going to answer one more question, then I got to head out of here. How early should I be drafting Blake Jarwin? I'm not super high on Jarwin. I'm not super low on him, though, either. I think he's being drafted in the right spot. Everyone looks at the vacated targets from Jason Witten last year and Randall Cobb. Obviously, CeeDee Lamb's going to take some of that. But the Cowboys were one of the pass-heaviest teams in football. We can't assume that they're going to be that pass-heavy this year. I do like Jarwin. I think he's a mid-tight end, too, but I wouldn't be drafting him as a low-end tight end 1 above guys like TJ Hawkinson. But, guys, that's going to do it. This is the first fantasy football Q&A live stream on YouTube. I hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll be doing these more frequently. But for now, make sure you subscribe to the FanDuel YouTube channel. And if you guys are playing MLB DFS, which you should be playing, right now we're going to hand it off. I'm going to hand it off over to my colleague, Jim Sonis. He's going to break down today's slate. You guys don't want to miss it because Jim is very, very good at MLB DFS. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I will talk to you next time.
Thank you to JJ Zachariason for handing things over here. And like he said, we've got an awesome slate for MLB DFS tap on tap for today. And it's an interesting one because usually we have this chat at 4 p.m. Eastern. We could not do that today because the lock is at 4:05 p.m. Eastern over on FanDuel for the main slate. And unfortunately, we have some weather concerns. So let's break this puppy down. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com. And taking a look at this main slate, there is a big question from a weather perspective. So we go here to Kevin Roth over on RotoGrinders, and he says that there is some risk of postponement for the Orioles and the Phillies. That is a pretty major concern. So that tosses things up. When we were talking on the solo shot this morning, I was discussing my favorite stacks of the day. The Phillies were one of those, facing Thomas Eshelman in a revenge game for Eshelman against his old team in the Phillies. I also do like the Rays, no other concerns there, and the Cubs. But I think with the weather the way it is right now, a little bit concerned, and I might be shuffling over towards dumping out of the Phillies because it does still look pretty gross over in Philadelphia. If people see additional updates on that game, please feel free to let me know in the YouTube comment section, because obviously I can't patrol Twitter right now and I can't see those updates. If you see anything, let me know. We'll try to dissect that. If you have questions about today's MLB DFS main slate and all of the relevant lineups have been posted, we can go through individual batters, we can go through stacks, we can go through pitchers, whatever you want to discuss. Leave your comments in the FanDuel YouTube page comment section, in the chat section. I'll be looking at that, running through your questions there. Over on Facebook as well, the FanDuel Facebook page, answering questions there, and as always on Twitch as well. First question here is from Jeff Hicks. Hello, Jeff. Hope you are doing well. Who will have more 2-home-run games the rest of their baseball careers, Byron Buxton or me? Byron Buxton is the definitive answer here, my boy. Double dogged last night while being on 0% of my daily fantasy rosters because I love Byron Buxton as an actual player, but I never tend to use him in DFS. He's batting so low in the order, and like there are issues with him as a baseball player too. So I, for some reason, never wind up on him when he hits home runs. So unfortunately, Jeff, I am going to pick Byron here, but I can guarantee you when he does do it again, he won't be on my rosters because I just, I'm apparently a jinx for my boy Byron Buxton. Going through this slate once again, for people who may not have heard things this morning, I think everything revolves around Yu Darvish, a pitcher. He's had about 11-ish starts now, 9 starts with his curveball usage being up. And this is all kind of, it's hard to get a legitimate read on Yu Darvish because his pitch usage is so weird. But 2.61 skill interactive ERA, 36% strikeout rate, 3% walk rate, 33% hard hit rate. And this Brewers team is striking out a ton this year. So Yu Darvish is number one for me. Josh is saying, Roth saying, have to decide to play in light rain while hoping the heavy stuff stays away. Definitely risky. Yeah. So he was saying, I was reading this before, that there was some rain north of the stadium, which is kind of scary. So, I mean, like, you kind of have to make a calculated risk when it comes to that Phillies game because it's a small slate. So we do want to try to find production where we can get it. And I think that both sides of that game are stackable. But it's tough. If you are entering in a slate and you have a stack that just totally whiffs, that's tough. The good thing is that I don't think I really personally want to use either pitcher in that game between Arrieta and Eshelman. So at least we're not going pitchers, but I think it depends on your risk tolerance. If you are okay with that risk, then the Phillies are a really good stack. If you are not okay with that risk, then I would go elsewhere. Look at the other 3 games here. I think you can get other stacks between the Rays and the Cubs, but it is definitely dicey for sure. So based on the way things stand right now, I am leaning towards being a little bit lower on that game. If we get word beforehand that they will delay the start, I would actually be a little bit higher on that game just because it means that they intend to play it, which is always a good thing. So I'd keep an eye on what they're saying about the weather about that game. And if we hear anything good, I will be all in on the Phillies. If not, I'm okay being a little bit lower on them. If you're going in like low dollar tournaments, I think that it's more okay. But I think it's more okay to maybe be a little bit more ambitious with the Phillies, but the higher the entry fee, the higher that risk gets for sure. All right, another from Jeff. Ian Happ offers value batting 7th. I think he's actually 5th. Ian Happ's awesome. Does a stack of Bryant up top plus someone that hits 8th or 9th make sense? Yeah, so we've actually talked about this before. I am of the belief that I don't care too much about where batters are within their specific lineup. So yes, if Chris Bryant gets on base, the odds that Ian Happ is the guy who drives him in aren't all that high. However, every time Chris Bryant gets on base, it increases the expected volume for Ian Happ because baseball does not operate on a clock. They operate based on outs. So every time there is a non-out, it increases the expectation for everyone. So a Chris Bryant walk increases volume for Victor Caratini, who's batting literally last. So everyone benefits, and that's why, for me, Jeff, personally, I don't care too much about where guys are in the order. I just want them to be in the same order. It is nice to get that double dip. If Ian Happ drives in Chris Bryant, you get the points for the runs scored, and you get points for the RBI as well. So that is great, but I still think that I would prefer to. I don't care too much where they're batting. Okay. YouTube comments. Be honest, do you have golf on in the background? Okay. I had my PGA Tour leaderboard up. I could show it to you, but it shows the fact that I used Ryan Armour in PGA DFS this week. I don't feel like admitting that, even though I just did. So I would show that, but we're gonna pass over that one. That one was from that's from Jeff over on YouTube. Okay. Troy. My daughter Aubrey would like to know if the Cubs are a good stack today. Aubrey, yes, they are. The Cubs are a good stack because I don't have a lot of choices. Normally, I don't want to stack against Brett Anderson because Brett Anderson gets a lot of ground balls, and ground balls are annoying. But we don't have a ton to choose from for today, so we're kind of whittling this list down. And Anderson allows a lot of balls in play, and a lot of those balls in play are hard hits. So I think that's enough for me to go at the Cubs for today. So if Aubrey is filling out lineups and wants to go at the Cubs, I say go all in. I was talking this morning on the solo shot about how I was hoping Ian Happ would get in the lineup. He's batting 5th for today for the Cubs. I am an Ian Happ fanboy. This is his first start of the year against a lefty for the Cubs, but batting 5th. No Schwarber, which stinks because I'd use him against a lefty too. But Happ batting 5th. Definitely better against righties than lefties, but he's batting 5th, $3,000. I would say anyone in these top 6 batters is a really good option for this Cubs team, and I'm willing to go there for sure. Twitch question from Peyton. $2,500 for a one-off at utility. Okay, let's go over here, scroll to utility, and scrolling. I think the Rays might have something. No, Brasso is $2,600, so that doesn't work. 25. Okay, here we go. All right. Jose Iglesias. No. You could go Steven Souza. I could get behind that. I don't really want to go red, so I'm not super into Jesse Winker. Maybe Shoko Akiyama. If we were to get the Phillies game, like if we were to be able to guarantee that game would play, I would say Andrew McCutchen. He's batting leadoff. His numbers against righties since the start of last year are not all that good. So he's not a priority, but batting leadoff on a stack that we like. So it depends on what your acceptance level is of that rain up in Philadelphia. If you are okay with the rain situation there, I would say go McCutchen. If you are not okay with the rain situation, who is the guy we were talking about? Oh, Souza. Souza might work then. So I would say either Souza or McCutchen based on just the offenses that I do want to attack. Mateo says, I love the Reds in 90-degree weather. What do you think? So I think that they're kind of in a swing zone. And with the potential of that Phillies game getting lopped off, it does increase my willingness to stack the Reds. The reason they were not on my initial list, Mateo, is that Trevor Williams is pretty good. He's especially good at limiting hard contact. These are his numbers this year. The reason I decided to stick with just this year for Trevor Williams, it's a 4-start sample, so it is a small sample, and there's always risk in that. But the reason I went that way is because he's cutting down on his four-seamer usage, leaning more on his off-speed stuff, as a lot of Pirates pitchers are doing, and it's been good for him. His strikeout rate is up to 22% in this sample. He is still keeping that hard contact rate down. So Trevor Williams has pitched well this year. He's been pretty decent as a pitcher for a while now. That's why I was not on the Reds initially. But, like, let's say in a hypothetical world, we get rid of these two stacks here. That leaves me with these 6 arms down here. And I think if I'm ranking the stacks, once we get rid of that, I would rank them. I'd rank the Rays number 1. I'd rank the Cubs number 2, and the Reds would be number 3 on that list. So, Mateo, I would say, oh, Chris Bryant got scratched? Oh, that's a bummer. Okay, well, that's annoying. Okay. I'm going to edit lineups after this is done. Anyway, okay, so that's stupid. Okay, maybe the Reds are better than the Cubs. Either way, the reason that I was lower on the Reds previously was that Williams does limit hard contact. So I think that if you are not going to go at the Phillies and Orioles game, it does make more sense to go at that Baltimore versus Philadelphia game. So I think that, Mateo, you could definitely go with the Reds in that scenario. Looking here at the Reds lineup, Akiyama is batting leadoff for $2,400. Nicholas Castellanos can mess up anybody, so I think that definitely works too. Let's take a look at Trevor Williams' platoon splits. The issue that I have with looking at platoon splits for him is I can't look at platoon splits this year because it's a very small sample. And he's a different pitcher this year than he was last year. So I'm going to look at the splits for Williams last year and see what we can learn from looking at those and see if we can see. But again, they're not going to be fully representative of what I would expect out of him this year. Okay, so Williams, 393, weighted on base average, allowed to lefties. We prefer to look at the plate discipline numbers and the batted ball numbers. Okay, 13% strikeout rate against lefties versus 22% against righties. And the hard contact goes up a bit to 34%. So still not a lot of hard contact. He does allow for some fly balls. So that definitely helps. So I would say if you're going to go with the Reds, which I'm okay with, I would probably skew towards the lefties, Akiyama, Joey Votto, Jesse Winker. They don't have a ton of lefties at the top end, so that's a bit of a bummer too. Another reason why I'd be a little bit lower, but with Bryant being scratched and that being a pretty massive bummer, and with the concerns around the weather for that Phillies game, I would say the Reds moving up my list. So Mateo, yeah, I think it is definitely okay to go with the Reds here, just because out of obligation, I guess, like they're not some stack that I necessarily love, but I think with other options kind of dipping away, we don't really have all that much choice but to move them up our list. To checking here on Ross' profile to see if there's any new updates there. Nothing new there. Let's check out the new Cubs lineup. Checking this on my other computer because I didn't want to. If I pull up Twitter on this computer, Nico Horner's batting leadoff now. Okay, so Nico Horner's batting leadoff. Kyle Schwarber's back somehow. Okay, so Chris Bryant gets scratched, and somehow Ian Happ moves down in the order. I don't explain that, but Horner leadoff, Rizzo, Baez, Contreras, Schwarber, Happ, Bodie, Souza, and Caratini. Okay, so let's take a look at Nico Horner here. Nico Horner's been playing pretty much every day, so I think that's like a good thing from a team confidence perspective. He is a righty. We like that against Brett Anderson. Scrolling down here to Nico Horner. Okay, so the largest sample we have here was on him in Double-A last year. 294 plate appearances, does not strike out, can get some stolen bases, but overall doesn't profile as being a super high upside player. So Nico Horner is batting leadoff. He's going to be a cheap play. I'm guessing he's $2,500. $2,500, yeah. So Nico Horner batting first for $2,500. I don't like the profile that much because I don't like he did have power in the lower minors, but look at the samples here. 15, 28, and 17 plate appearances when he was in Double-A for all of last year. I think the Cubs Double-A park, if I remember correctly, is pretty pitcher friendly. So it's very possible that his power was held in check as a result of that park. But I remember researching this when Gleyber Torres was there. So this is a long time ago. It could be very outdated. They might not even have the same Double-A affiliate at this point, but pretty high ground ball rates for Hoerner at most levels, except, the largest sample was in Double-A at 42%. So I'm not enamored with Hoerner, I think is the way that I would say it. And I think that with the Chris Bryant being scratched, you're probably not going to need a whole lot of salary savings because if you look at this Cubs lineup, let's see if it's been updated here yet. If you look at the Cubs lineup, there aren't a ton of guys who are going to be super cost prohibitive. So I think for me, I am okay with skipping over Nico Hoerner despite the fact that his salary is super low, maybe leaving salary on the table and going with guys. I mean, Rizzo's numbers against lefties are quite poor, honestly. But I think that I could still go there because he's a good overall hitter, and that's definitely valuable. So it's a tough slate. Yeah, Josh is saying that today is a difficult slate. I would agree with that assessment. We don't have Austin Meadows as a higher salary guy on that Rays team. Christian Yelich is facing Yu Darvish. I want no part of that. We don't know what the weather situation is with the Phillies. Nicholas Castellanos facing a righty who's good against righties. So there are some pretty tough situations here for sure. But I think that the way that you play this is you pick your favorite offenses and you stack them regardless of how much salary you wind up leaving on the table here. So let's go to the Rays. If I am ranking just my favorite players on this Rays team, straight up, Brandon Lau's strikeout rate against lefties is like 44% since the start of last year. So I'm not even sure Lau would be in my top ranking here of the Rays. I want Martinez. I want Hunter Renfroe. I definitely want those guys. I want Yandy Diaz. I know I kind of spoke down on him this morning on the podcast. Why did I put Martinez in the utility slot? That was very stupid. Okay, so we're going to put Martinez in outfield instead. Be more smart about this. I spoke ill of Yandy Diaz's batted ball numbers because he's hitting more ground balls than I wanted, and the hard hit rate wasn't that high. But batting third in a stack that I like on a bad slate, I can't be too picky. So I am going to go with Yandy Diaz. The fourth batter, we could go Willy Adames. Let's see here. The Rays numbers against lefties since the start of last year. Let's sort by plate appearances for this. We can get the irrelevant guys out of there. Adames, 42% hard hit rate, 31% fly ball rate. I know he was having some fairly major issues at the plate earlier this year, so let's pull up his numbers and check out to see if things have gotten any better for him. All right, so the strikeout rate is still 33%. That's high. That's pretty annoying. Let's see if he's gotten better in recent games with that strikeout rate. Because the strikeout rate is the thing you want to look at if you're trying to judge a batter in a small sample. And it looks like he's striking out a little bit less. Okay, so that's encouraging for sure. Getting some hits. Had a home run last night. Is he making good contact? Yeah, he's making decent contact. Okay, I've talked myself into Willy Adames. So those are the four Rays that I want within this stack. So it gives me Darvish with those four guys. None of these four guys cost you more than $2,900. And if I scroll up here, I've got $3,600 left per batter. I'm not going to hit the salary cap. So I think that the way you play this thing for today is you pick your two favorite stacks and you stack them regardless of how much salary you wind up leaving on the table as a result of that. I think that's just kind of the way we have to do things here because I don't know the way things are going to play out. I don't see a lot of high-salaried batters that I necessarily want to use. So I'm going to go with just the players I think are best. I think that the way that you'd view this is there is no salary cap for today. You just kind of pick your favorites. And I think that's the way I'd go with things. So Rays number one for me, given the question marks around that Phillies game, I'd probably put them down at number two. Let's talk about because there's a situation where the Phillies outlook gets better as we get closer to lock. Maybe that rain does wind up dissipating. It doesn't look all that great right now. But how do we play this? Oh my goodness, the Phillies are saving me from myself by giving Rhys Hoskins a day off. Bless you, Phillies. Okay, so let's figure out how we play this thing under the assumption that we feel comfortable using the Phillies for today. So there's no Rhys Hoskins, which means that we're probably going to go, let's get the Rays. Yeah, okay, so we're going to go with Harper first. I'm still in the Rays, dummy. Okay, Harper first, Real Muto second. You got good numbers even against righties. Let's go here to check out the numbers for Real Muto against righties. All right, they're good. All right, if I remember correctly. Oh, man. Okay. Where are we at? Okay, I can't read. There we go. 45% hard hit rate, 37% fly ball rate. Those are awesome. So I want him. McCutchen actually better than I remembered against righties. So let's put him in there too. He kind of falls under the same umbrella we were talking about before the Rays, where sure, you're not going to need the salary savings out of McCutchen, but I do think you can go there pretty easily and feel okay about it. Other Phillies within this lineup. Okay, so Bruce is batting 7th. We talked this morning about how I like Bruce because unlike Brasso, when he does leave games for a pinch hitter, he tends to do so pretty late in games. Bruce, I think, has left twice in 8 starts for a pinch hitter later in the game. In both those times, I think it was the 8th or the 9th inning. So Jay Bruce is probably going to get you at least 3 plate appearances, and I like that quite a bit. But if I'm going with 3 Phillies, I've already got McCutchen, Harper, and Real Muto in there. I'm probably going to go Gregorius over Jay Bruce. Gregorius had a really rough year last year, so these numbers include last year's marks. So you see that 88 WRC plus, you're probably not going to be super enthused about Gregorius, but hey, 35% hard hit rate, a 46% fly ball rate. That's still good enough for me. So as a result of that, rather than going with Bruce down lower in the order because I don't need the salary savings, I'm going to go with Gregorius as my 4th batter within this Phillies stack. And honestly, like, if I do go with those 4 guys, that does leave me at 29-25. And at that point, I probably would need to find some values. That's where guys like Horner definitely gain some value. And I think that helps. So maybe you do actually wind up using the entire salary cap here. The good thing about Nico Horner, I know I'm going on a tangent here from what I was just talking about, but he's second base eligible, and second base is terrible. Second base is it's been the worst position of the entire year for MLB DFS. I've had nightmares around that one position basically day in, day out. Like, you have Mike Brasso batting leadoff. He's $2,600 in a stack that we like, but he left a game in like the 5th inning for a pinch hitter once the lefty was gone. It might have actually been twice. I can't do that. Like, sure, he could go yard in his first plate appearance. Now that I'm saying this, he probably is going to go yard, just as like that's the way things have been going for the past week or so. Like, he's probably going to go yard right away. However, you need him to do that. You don't have a lot of wiggle room with Mike Brasso if he leaves for a pinch hitter. I remember, I was playing a lineup earlier, and I had a one-off at second base, and I wound up going Hanser Alberto, but now we have the question marks around whether or not that game is going to play. So I think that Horner, despite the fact that I'm not all that enthused with his profile, he might just by default wind up being the number 1 second baseman on this slate. I was talking with Brandon Lau earlier, like, the dude can't make contact against lefties. He's a really good player, but I'd rather have him against a righty versus a lefty. So as much as I do like Brandon Lau, I don't want to use him against the lefty, because if we pull up the numbers here, this is his whole career because since the start of last year. Where is Lau? Okay, 44% hard hit rate, good. 38% fly ball rate, also good. 43% strikeout rate with a 3% walk rate, not hot, Bob. So I think Brandon Lau, despite being a really good player, probably not at the top of my list. The one argument you can make in favor of Brandon Lau is that how long can we expect the Red Sox starter, Kyle Hart, to be in that game? Maybe they'll get a righty in there. That could help out a guy like Lau. So you can still make a case for Brandon Lau. I'm not saying he's a bad play, but like, I'm annoyed because I don't want a guy with a 43% strikeout rate sitting on my roster. Feel free to get any additional questions you may have about this slate, because we're getting closer to lock. Most of the lineups are out now, I believe. I guess the Brewers have been out, but I don't want the Brewers because they're facing my boy Yu Darvish, so I guess I don't care too much about them. But if you have any additional questions, feel free to put those on Twitch, on Facebook, or on YouTube. We have some additional time to get to those before we get to lock for today. Yeah, here's the updated Cubs lineup in case you weren't able to see it for yourself. I like Contreras a lot, batting 4th. Now that Schwarber's in there, I think that he's a pretty solid play. My one concern that I have is that if he wasn't healthy enough to be in the original lineup, is he healthy enough to have like a really solid day? Maybe it's just a day of rest for Schwarber. But against lefties, 29% strikeout rate. That's high, but a 45% hard hit rate, a 43% fly ball rate. I love that. So I do think Kyle Schwarber is a pretty good option. Okay, word from Josh here is that Philadelphia has delayed the start of their game, but they are not postponed. I think that's probably a good thing. I'm going to pull up Roth. I'm pulling up him on my other computer, two screens, because Twitter slows my computer down too much when I'm on these streams here. He hasn't talked about that yet, but I think honestly, with this game being delayed as a delayed start rather than postponed, I feel a little bit better about it. So I would say a slight bump up to the Philadelphia Phillies batters. It is still a pretty big risk. And if you want to lower the risk tied to your team, Philadelphia is probably not a team that you want to stack for today. But I am more okay with it now. So I would say as long as your risk tolerance is good enough, I would say the Philadelphia Phillies are in play for stacking for today. I mentioned before that my favorites are Harper, Realmuto, McCutchen, and Gregorius. I do think that Jay Bruce is an option as well if you want to jump down there. Again, they saved me from myself with keeping Rhys Hoskins out for today. So feeling a little bit better about Philadelphia. I think the other good thing that does help us with regards to Philadelphia is that they missed a couple of games due to COVID with the Marlins testing positive. And they've got a lot of doubleheaders already this year. So the incentive to play this game, and this one is in Philadelphia, so it is their call, the incentive to play this game is higher for them than it would be for a lot of other teams. I think that gives us at least a little bit of additional safety when it comes to stacking Philadelphia. So again, my willingness to stack that team is going up a bit. And I think that does make the slate a little bit easier because we have, if we count Philadelphia, we do have 4 legitimate stacking options. We have the Cubs against Anderson. We have the Rays against Hart. We have the Phillies against Eshelman. And I do think that the Orioles are in play against Jake Arrieta too. Arrieta has looked good in his first 2 starts. His numbers overall are pretty good, but not getting a lot of whiffs. And even last year when he was healthy enough to throw that slider, his numbers still weren't that good. So I would put the Orioles 4th on my stacking list. But I think that there's still an option. I think going back to what Mateo had asked for, I think that the Reds are in play, and I'm okay with that. But I think Williams is good, and I think that I'm willing to make a stand on that. So to me, right now, with the way things stand, considering the risk in Philadelphia, I will put the Rays first, the Cubs second. But with that game being delayed and not postponed so far, I am going to push the Phillies up to number 3 on my list, even when you consider the risks around that game. So to me, stacks today are, we'll go Rays 1, Cubs 2, Phillies 3. I will go the Reds 4 over the Orioles because of the risk of that game. I think that that's enough to justify bumping Williams down. And then we'll go the Orioles with 5 at number 5 for the stacks for today. Pitchers for today are Yu Darvish, number 1, Tyler Glasnow, number 2 by a hair over DeSclafani, but I think they're very close. So if you have a strong leaning towards DeSclafani or towards DeSclafani over Glasnow, go for it. I think that's totally fine and totally justifiable because DeSclafani's pitching really well. He's facing a bad offense. Hopefully JJ's not still watching the stream as I speak ill of his Pittsburgh Pirates. He's facing a bad offense though, so I think DeSclafani definitely does work. He'd be my number 3, but again, if you want to push him above Tyler Glasnow, I'll not push back on that. So overall, a pretty tough slate for today. I'm glad that it's a 4:05 lock versus a 7 o'clock lock because I didn't want to talk about a 2-game slate for 25 minutes. So we'll see how things play out. Let's cross our fingers and hope they play baseball in Philadelphia. Bryce Harper, spread out your hair, get us an umbrella for the park tonight. Let's make this thing happen. Let's get some baseball in. Let's win some money in DFS as well. That is all the time that we have for today. Big thank you to JJ Zachariason for the lead-in for today, answering your fantasy football questions. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald as well, our video producer, for running both of these shows today. Thank you, Cal, for some awesome work across the board for today. And thank you all for tuning in and having an engaging conversation. I know today is a weird slate, but I hope things go well for you. We'll talk to you again tomorrow, solo shot 9 a.m. Back here once again for a Friday afternoon stream to get you set for Friday's MLB DFS slate. Before we sign off, look at the pitchers on tomorrow's slate. Jacob deGrom, Garrett Cole. We got Brandon Woodruff, who I adore. Tyler Chatwood, what could go wrong? Clayton Kershaw's there. Dinelson Lamet. It's going to be a fun day tomorrow. So make sure you tune in tomorrow. It'll be a whole lot of fun. We'll talk to you then. Win some money tonight. This has been the FanDuel Fantasy Q&A.